We're here today filming for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive, and it's our great pleasure to have with us saxophonist Billy Mitchell. Welcome.
Thank you.
You just told me you were born at an early age. I hate to steal your line. It was a good one. And tell me about where you grew up.
I grew up in Detroit. I was born in Kansas City. We moved to Detroit when I was 2 years old. I grew up there.
Was Detroit a city that had a good deal of music going on in it?
Yes, one of the most. It was tremendous amount of jazz music in Detroit at that time. There were so many clubs. There were, that was before we hit the Great White Jackpot.
The Great White Jackpot.
Yeah, that was before, let's say Lionel Hampton played the Paramount. I think that's where the breakthrough was. But in those days, you had all kinds of black and tan clubs, and every little club had a band and a singer and a shake dancer and master of ceremonies, and there were maybe 4 or 5 within a 2-block span, you know. It was a lot of music going on, and that was the late 30s and early 40s.
What brought you to the saxophone?
I think I wanted to lead a band.
Yeah.
I think I wanted to lead a band. I think I used to listen to music on the radio. I remember in particular, I think it was Benny Goodman's Camel Caravan. And I think I wanted a clarinet because he stood in front of the band and played all the solos.
Yeah.
Didn't work out that way, but.
Did you take lessons in school, or was it? Were you
Yeah, I started in the public school system.
Yeah.
Yeah, about I guess I was around the 6th grade, something like that.
Yeah.
You know.
Nat Tolles was a big band at the time.
Yeah, Nat Tolles was. See, in that time, there were also a lot of territory bands. Nat Tolles was in the Midwest, based in Omaha. There were other bands like Snookum Russell in Cincinnati, Lloyd Hunter in Iowa, and there were so many. There were so many, but all that's gone now. You know, those were the so-called territory bands.
Can you explain that for folks that might not be familiar with that term?
Which term?
The territory bands.
Well, they worked out of a certain territory, and usually within a certain radius. Like Tolles, he was based in Omaha, and he played all over Nebraska, Iowa, and also the South. All bands went south at that time, you know, because all music was mostly big band music, and it was for dancing, you know, for dances.
Yeah.
So a territory band was more or less meant that a band's headquarters is in a particular.
Right.
In Tolles' case, it was Midwest. You know, in others, it was South or where we happen to be.
How large a group was that, and was it
Tolles?
in the playing of it? Did you have to play a lot by ear, or was there music written out for you in that group?
There was music written out. Right? All the same people are doing the arranging today. Well, not, you know, many of them are left, but we were playing arrangements for like Bill Davis. He's the one that wrote April in Paris for Basie, and the organ player. We were playing his music. There were arrangements. Of course, you always play by ear, though. That's
yeah, right.
Music is what you hear.
A lot of the fellas at that time seemed to also go through Lucky Millender's band.
I came to New York in Lucky Millender's band. 1948. I stayed in Lucky's band 2 weeks. I got fired. And then I went back. The reason he fired me is because they had on a pair of black trousers instead of tuxedo pants. So I stayed there. I stayed there about, I guess, 2 more months, and then who did I go with then? I think it was Lunsford's band.
Mm-hmm.
They were making a memorial tour, and that was the era of where you had to have 2 tenor saxophones battling as a part of the showmanship. And their band wasn't set up that way. They had 2 altos and only 1 tenor, and they didn't have time to have the book translated. So I got the gig because I could translate the alto parts.
Oh, that's a tricky transposition.
Not really.
Well, that's good.
Especially after you do it
Yeah.
a little while, you know.
Who did you have to battle against?
Joe Thomas.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he was a legend.
Uh-huh.
He was my roommate, too. It was kind of nice having him for a roommate.
Yeah.
See, I was young. I was 21. This was my first time out here, but Joe had been out for years.
Mm-hmm.
So he knew everyone, everywhere. So in those days, you shared rooms, too. So wherever we went, he always knew someone who invited him to stay with them, so I always had room to myself.
That's nice. That's nice. Made it a little bit easier to be on the road.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was it like being on the road in that time? Was it different when you went from one part of the country to the other, going from north to south, or?
Yeah, but not any. Well, yes, there's a difference, but you find adverse conditions, as we say, shall we say, anywhere.
Yeah.
You know, the geographical location didn't necessarily dictate as to what the social or accepted mores of the community might be. You know.
Right. And the majority of the gigs that you played were for dances still at that time. It seemed like dancing was a very big part of jazz music at that time.
The two are inseparable.
Yeah. What happened after? Did you go back to Detroit and play with the Jones?
No, the Jones played with me.
All right.
I came here, 48. I worked with Lucky and Lunsford, and then I think Milton Buckner's big band, if he left hanging, and then Walter Fuller, who had been Dizzy's arranging, then in his band. And then I left here, and my father died, and I went back to Detroit in February of '49. And then I left there when I went to join Woody Herman in somewhere around October or September or October of '49 or something like that. And I stayed out there a couple months with Woody Herman. Then I came back to Detroit and started a band at a place called the Bluebird Inn there. And well, I didn't start the band. As a matter of fact, I went in there working with someone else, but eventually it became my band. And then Thad Jones and Elvin Jones and Tommy Flanagan came in after that, after a year or so, something like that.
Those were all Detroit area people?
Yes, say Detroit area, yeah, great, because the Joneses were from Pontiac, but that's like 28 miles or something like that out of Detroit.
How did your career with the Basie Band come about?
Lockjaw came by one day and then said, "Hey man, Basie wants to talk to you." And then about a week later, Ernie Wilkins came by and said, "Hey man, Basie wants to talk to you." Usually the way you get a job in music is somebody that's already in the band. When there comes an opening, naturally, you know, they recommend someone. Say, "Hey, Basie, I got somebody for you." I don't know exactly who recommended me to Basie. I'd always thought maybe it could have been Thad or it could have been Frank Foster, you know, because I had been associated with them most recently in Detroit. The years later, I think Joe Newman told me it was he that recommended me to Basie, but I don't really know. You know.
Did you enjoy playing with that group?
Basie's man?
Yeah.
Of course. It was the band of the land. It was a great band. It was one of the greatest. And the respect that you get, you know, was enormous. They were at the top of the heap at the time because Basie and Duke were the only people that really kept steady bands at that time. You know, the rest of the bands would, for example, Woody Herman or Stan Kenton, they would organize to make a tour, and then when the tour was over, this band would disband.
Right.
But Basie stayed active all year round.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Let's see, at that time, Marshall Royal
Was a concert master of the band.
very important figure in the Basie group at that time.
Very important figure anyway.
Yeah. And who was your other tenor player? Was it Eric Dixon at that time? Or?
No, Eric came in after me. Frank West and Frank Foster. Frank alternated playing tenor or alto, whichever horn he had in his hand. That's the one he played. Like I told you, once you get used to it, you know. So sometimes rather than change horns, he would just play his part on whichever horn he had, you know. So whatever struck him. If he felt like playing the third alto part, he'd play it on the alto. If he already had the tenor in his hand, he'd play it on tenor. You know.
That's neat.
The saxophone section was Charlie Folks on baritone, Frank West playing the alto and tenor, and Frank Foster and myself playing tenor, and Marshall, of course.
Yeah. There certainly was something about the rhythm section in Basie's group that made it distinctive. Was it enjoyable to play over that rhythm section as for the soloists?
It's enjoyable to play with any good rhythm section.
Yeah.
Don't you enjoy playing with a good rhythm section? Well, that was a good rhythm section.
Yeah, it sure was. What made it that way?
What made what way?
Have a distinctive sound that made that group seem to be so smooth.
I don't think I understand what you mean by what ingredients made it that way.
Yeah.
What do you think made it that way?
Well, I think it may have come from the fact that Basie played so economically that the rhythm section had a lot of space to it. And it just seemed to be really light, I guess. It seemed to be, maybe they were keeping in mind the dancers too at the time. How did the saxophone, how did you decide who got the solo space? Was that from the arranger standpoint, or did Basie, you know, kind of indicate who he wanted to play on what tunes?
Never, well, I don't, the chair has certain solos that are built into it, you know, like if you come in the band and this particular tune had the solo for your chair, and you played it, you know. Somebody would tell you, hey man, this is your chorus.
Yeah.
That's all it was to that.
Right. Was Joe Williams still performing occasionally with a group at that time?
He was in the group as a permanent member at that time. As I'm trying to recall, who was it that left first? Was it Joe or myself? But we left within a couple months of each other. Either he or I was first. I think maybe it was myself, and I left in '61. I think he was still there then. But the last week that I worked with the band, we worked with Tony Bennett at the place in Jersey. What's the name? Latin Casino or something like Latin Quarter, something like that. So I don't think Joe was singing that week because naturally Tony Bennett was the featured attraction. So I may have left Joe there. I think he was still in the band when I left. I think I was the first one to leave.
Yeah. He certainly played behind some great singers over the years with Tony, and of course earlier on.
All of them.
Yeah.
We recorded with Everybody. At that time, everybody wanted to record with the Basie band because the musicianship was so high, and then the band itself was moving. So record companies always wanted to try to put two saleable commodities together if they could.
Right.
So everybody wanted to record with us. Just about every singer of the day, King Cole, Johnny Mathis, Ella, Sarah, Tony, Frank. Oh, and there's some more in there, you know, quite a few. That was one of the advantages of the job. It really wasn't that much in salary, but we did rather well because we had so many outside things. Mm-hmm. The television shows, we did all the shows, and so that made the job really a little more lucrative than it would have been otherwise. The salaries were no great amount of money.
And did you get to travel overseas
Mm-hmm.
with Basie at that time?
Yeah, I went to Europe with Basie in '59, I think. But I'd been around the world with Dizzy's band before that.
That was a State Department tour?
Yeah.
Is that what that was? Mm-hmm. That must have been really something in the middle of
that was a nice trip because it wasn't hurried or rushed. We spent anywhere from 10 days to 2 weeks almost in each place, wow. You know. So it was a chance to observe some of the cultures in the different places. Like the first stop was Abadan, Iran. That's a big change from New York.
I guess so. How did they accept the music?
Everywhere jazz is well accepted because it's a rarity. For them, it was a rarity to experience the original and authentic mm-hmm. music. You know, the reception was great everywhere, but that has changed over the years too. You know, I'm one of those that thinks if jazz ain't dead now, it's real low sick.
Why do you feel that way?
Why do I feel that way?
Yeah.
Because I look around me, I don't see any jazz, I don't see any clubs, I don't see any. Don't you feel that way?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a certain smaller group of people that are keeping it alive, but you know,
like I said,
we've talked about
it's low sick.
Yeah, low sick. Yeah, there's certainly not the opportunities for young players to learn like they used to, I guess. And you had a few years in between with Basie. You left, you came back, and
well, no, it was not really going back. I would go, like if someone had, for example, one time Eric's mother was ill, so he had to take off. Mm-hmm. So I filled in for him for a couple of weeks. One time Lockjaw had, but it wasn't really like I went back to the band. Okay. I was just holding the chair until mm-hmm. these people got back.
Yeah. What was it like to play, didn't you play in Europe with Clark Boland Big Band? Was their conception, the way they played big band music, any different from here in the States?
Their conception. I have to break that. What do you mean by was their conception?
European approach to jazz music. Was it different at all, or did they really just reflect what was going on in the States? They must have learned it from listening to records too, I would imagine.
I find that a tough one, man. Music, jazz music or any other kind of music is a calling. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that there's any particular bent caused by geographic location. Mm-hmm. No, I thought that was, and after all, so many of the members, after all, were American jazz musicians. In the band with me was Shahib Shahab, Billy Bailey, Idris Suleiman, Kenny Clark, Nat Peck. These are all American musicians. I couldn't analyze their conception by their geography.
Were you ever tempted to stay in Europe, like some of those other fellas?
No.
No. And you ended up here in the New York area. You've been here for quite a while, right? I noticed you're playing a gig pretty soon as part of on the island, I think. Is it Sunday? You're playing with.
Yeah, this is an affair to benefit musicians who don't have proper medical insurance and things like that.
Yeah.
It's the Jazz Foundation of America, I think they're called. I don't know too much about them, but I did say that I would take part in that particular concert.
Right. What kind of, how often are you playing these days? Is this enough to keep you happy? And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I go to Europe 2, 3, 4 times a year, depending on what the circumstances are.
Right.
And I don't come into New York.
no. When you go to Europe, are you able to pick the people you're going to go with? Or is it sometimes a type of thing where you go over there as a soloist and play with a rhythm section over there?
There are all kinds of situations,
Yeah,
all types of situations. Each one is an individual thing, you know. Depends on what the rules of the house are. If
right.
they want you to bring your own group, or they want you to come. Their program may be for, like, a lot of them, of course, have been Basie related
Yeah,
type things. They call them everything from Basie's alumni to the Countsmen and the 1 O'Clock Jumpers. And then there are other things where I go and I'm just featured with a particular group,
Right.
and there are other things where I go and I take my own group.
right.
Each one is
Yeah.
individual.
What kind of band leader was Basie? Was he easy to work for?
Yeah, he was easy to work for.
Yeah. Him and Ellington seem to have very different styles of leading a group, from what I've heard.
I wouldn't know.
Uh-huh.
I never worked with Dukes Bed.
Yeah. Who were some of the your favorite arrangers for the Basie group at the time?
Well, my favorite arrangers with the Basie group at the time were the ones that were in the band. Although Basie never recorded a full album of their work, or he may have. I think he did. I think the one, Frank, chairman of the board, I think that was all of Frank Foster's. But I thought the best writer for the bands were the members, Frank Foster, Ernie Wilkins, and Thad Jones, and later on Eric. But like I say, Eric came after me. When I left, I think Bud Johnson took my place. And then I think it was Eric and then Jimmy Forrest. I don't remember.
You think it's because those guys knew exactly what went well in the band, because they were right in the middle of it, so they could write more effectively.
Yeah, they could write for the people in the band.
Yeah.
Like when one of them wrote something, he envisioned, he knew the capabilities of the person he was writing it for. I've seen, give an example of what I mean. We had a rehearsal one time in Chicago, and Nelson Riddle brought in the material for an album. And we rehearsed it and ran it down. And naturally, first time, things like that, Nelson was listening, thinking about some things he could change. And then Marshall said, "Thad, did you say you had something?" And Thad said, "Yeah." So Thad passed out his arrangement. And from the first note, just, and Nelson sat there and listened, and when it was over, he looked at bass, and he collected his music. He says, "I think I'll go back and try again."
No kidding.
There's nothing unusual about that.
Yeah. What was the basic rhythm section while you were with the group? Was it?
Eddie Jones, bass, Sonny Payne, and Freddie Green.
Mm-hmm. Freddie was certainly a important part of that.
Sweetest cat ever lived.
Yeah. Great.
Pep.
Pep, they call him.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a
very
nickname?
easygoing type of person, very level. You know, of course he could. When he did get upset, it was kind of fun to see.
Yeah. He would wait and choose his moments. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When you were, after you left the Basie band, you worked mostly with small groups.
After I left the Basie band, I was fixing pool tables.
Mm-hmm.
Because when anybody would see me on the street, they'd say, "Hey, man, I didn't know the band was in town." When I left the Basie band, I had been in big bands for 5 years, so all contacts and things here were.
Yeah.
So when I left the band, I put on a pair of overalls. That didn't last long.
Yeah. Would you suggest if to young players that they try to make their living in music these days?
Would you?
Well, probably not.
Well, I'm not going to give you any argument on that. But, you know, as crowded and as the field may be, and as sparse as opportunities may be, I think it's pretty much, there's always room for the best.
Mm-hmm. If people really have it in their blood, you know, I don't think there's any denying it.
Well, you don't play, that's it. You don't play music because you necessarily want to. Or when I say play music, I mean you don't follow a musician's life and lifestyle unless you really have to. You really can't do anything else.
Yeah. Someone said it's almost like an illness. You can't get rid of it, and positive illness, I hope.
I'd like to say it's a calling.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to put it. What do you listen to at home? Do you have certain tastes in music?
I like great music.
Great music. All kinds, then.
I like great music.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can you remember recording these records? It's interesting that Basie.
Yes and no. I can remember one of these dates. I can remember the studio and Ralph Sharon sitting at the piano. But like I said, it doesn't say here what year that was. Some of them I remember, and some of them I don't. You know. A lot of times you see something and somebody you say, "Oh, who is that? What is that?" Say, "Hey, that's you, man. You did that such and such a time." "Oh yeah, no kidding." That happens.
Yeah. When you were doing in the studio recording it, if you had a tenor solo and you didn't like what you played, did you ever get a chance to do it again, or was it pretty much, you know, they had to?
Well, if you didn't like something, you could say, "Look here, let's try that again. I think I can do better with it."
Mm-hmm.
But then you keep what was done before,
Right.
and then you do better with it. And then sometimes somebody will say to you, "You want to try that again, man? You think you do better with it?" "No, man, that's enough. Let it go."
That was it.
Depends on this time.
Yeah. You did some playing with Al Gray after the Basie band, is that right?
Yeah, we had a small group together. I first met Al way back in that Lucky Mona band in '48. And then after we had both left Basie's band, we had a sextet for a small time, a couple of years. Dave Burns, Bobby Hutchison, Herman Wright, Candy Finch, and Al and myself.
Mm-hmm. Who would handle the business for a group like that?
I did.
Yeah. Was that a hard task?
Terrible.
Yeah.
When you got a band, you become mother, father, priest, laundry ticket holder, banker.
Yeah.
You want to lead a band?
No.
Got out of that one
Yeah.
quick.
Oh, the business of music. Yeah, I mean, that's much harder than the actual playing of it, I would think.
Well, I'll tell you about the business. You know who gets the money? Whoever
ahead,
gets
tell
his
me.
hands on it first.
Yeah.
Well, that's the way that goes.
Do you listen to any young players that you think are good for the future of jazz?
Do you mean just purposefully set out to listen to young players to see what's good for jazz, or am I listening to the radio and I hear some of the younger
Yeah, I
players?
mean, do you hear somebody every once in a while that you think is kind of?
Oh, I hear a lot of people that that are quite promising, that are young people, and you wonder which direction they'll go. You know, I've heard a lot though that they were just marvelous as youngsters, but 10 years later you say, whatever became of?
Mm.
And so it's not, you know. It takes, I always like to say, it takes you 20, 25 years to learn, and then 5 or 6 years to learn what to leave out. And there's a lot of the youngsters get caught up in the proficiency and the musicality, and they forget the emotion. And that's the emotion it takes longer to. You have to experience it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't work with somebody like Dizzy Gillespie without learning something. If you got your eyes open, you know, and it ain't his complete appeal wasn't only in what he was playing; it was how he was presenting.
Mm-hmm.
Presentation is so important, and that's the thing that you don't learn at the same time you're learning to play the instrument. And so many of the, not only youngsters, many people, they get caught up in the musicality, like I say, and there's no emotion there. So it's a balancing of the two. It's only time, and you know, there's many, in other words, what I'm saying is, yeah, there are a lot of guys that you hear, oh, wow, isn't he marvelous, and he's only 18 years old. That's, okay, now let me hear him when he's 38.
Uh-huh. So he's playing a little more. I want to hear some experience behind what he's playing, and some playing more from life than from.
Well, I don't make those judgments.
Yeah.
I don't try to analyze
Mm-hmm.
what I hear. I don't think music has to be explained in terms, in grammatical terms. I'm not caught up in that.
Right.
I don't listen to somebody and say, oh, that young man, he plays too much of that, or he don't do enough of this. I don't bother with that.
Mm-hmm.
I like great music. If I hear something, that was great, and that's the end of it. I leave that to the journalists and the archivists.
Yeah. Maybe to the people that don't play, oftentimes are the ones that come up with ways to explain things, I guess. Anything you'd like to add about your views on music, or where you think it's going in the future?
No, I really don't give that much thought. I mean, where is it going in the future? Who knows? You mean, should we spend time in speculating? Well, I think maybe what's going to be that everybody's going to start playing songs.
Yeah.
I never think about those things.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for your time, And it's been a great pleasure talking to Billy Mitchell, who's a great saxophonist and
Well,
former member
thank you.
of a lot of wonderful bands. And I hope you have a great gig this weekend. And thanks for your time.
Will you be in town?
We will not be in town, unfortunately.
What a pity, what a pity, what a pity, what a pity. You could come out and partake and contribute.
Maybe we'll be back. So next time I'll call you up and see where you're playing and
Oh,
see
wow.
if we can coordinate it.
Well, let me wish you a lot of luck on your endeavor.
Uh-huh.
I certainly think it's a worthwhile project, and I hope you'll be able to find some people who might be a little more enlightening.
No, I like your basic outlook on music. I think is very refreshing. You know, the idea of great music. You know.
Yeah, that's simple. That's it. Either you like it or you don't.
Yeah.
You know, no sense in trying to take it apart and see
Yeah.
what it is, unless you're writing an article.
Right.
You know.
Okay, well, on behalf of Hamilton College Jazz Archive, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, Mr.